so often with traumas and depression, other forms of mental health, is you get stuck in those thoughts, and finding a way to disconnect from that is pretty important.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Help is on the Way, a companion podcast to the documentary film The Call. And I've got a very special guest with me today. I've got Jackson Williams, who is a mental health clinician in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Jackson is in the film. He was gracious enough to help us get this film done. He was very important to this project, and we're very grateful for all the help he gave us during that time. And also, Jackson, just welcome to the podcast, and it's great to see you again, my friend.
Good morning, Charlie. Thank you for having me. And it's good to see you. It's been a while since we talked.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I know. I'm hoping to get back to New Mexico hopefully in the next couple of months. So hopefully we can get some dinner or something. So I know we've got only so much time with you today, so let's jump right into it. And why don't you go ahead and give us your history of as a mental health provider, what that means. Talk to me about your journey there, so that people can get a feel for an idea of who you are.
Okay. I sort of did a midlife shift. I had been a computer engineer after I got out of the Air Force in 1984. I'd been a computer engineer for roughly 20 years or more, and made a shift in life. So I went back and got my master's in counseling, and then waited a year or two and started a doctorate in behavioral health, which was, the whole thing was kind of a major shift for me, going from engineering to the mental health world. But it was something that fit into my history. I'd spent a lot of years throughout my life helping things like volunteering for different Special Olympics and those sorts of things. So it was sort of a natural progression for me. So I originally started, I interned at a small clinic in downtown Albuquerque. We worked with a lot of people who were in poverty in the lower socioeconomic level. We had a student clinic, so we got the opportunity to work with a lot of clients we wouldn't have had the opportunity to work with in different clinics. The gentleman that started the clinic, he got his master's in social work in Berkeley in 1963. So he kind of approached
Wow.
therapy in that way, the coffee house therapy and that kind of thing. So it was a wonderful place to intern. If a client had $5, they got therapy for $5. If they didn't have anything, we still saw them. It was a wonderful place. We learned a lot. We learned a lot from a lot of mistakes that we made, but we felt we were really doing good work, because at least people were being seen, and we were very supported in ways that we approach. I learned very quickly in counseling school. You learn to sort of think of therapy happening in four walls with a nice, soft lighting and a couch and a comfortable chair. And that's not always the case. In some of these cases, I would take a walk in the park with a client, or I would sit out under a tree and we would pray before we would start therapy, because that's where the client was. And
Yeah.
so I stayed there after I got my license. I stayed there for a couple of years, but unfortunately, it being a community clinic like that, it was really hard to make a living doing that. So I went to work for the New Mexico Children, Youth, and Families Department. I was a unit therapist in one of the secure facilities. In other words, juvenile justice, where kids were adjudicated. We call them adjudicated in New Mexico rather than convicted. It benefits the kid later in life because they're not convicted, they're adjudicated. So when they go to apply for jobs, it tends to not follow them around. And I think that was a sane way to handle juvenile justice issues. So
Absolutely.
I spent about 8 years in juvenile justice as a unit therapist. It was difficult. It was very difficult to do real therapy in that environment. For one thing, most of these kids are very, very traumatized. In New Mexico, studies, we've looked at studies like the Adverse Childhood Experiences studies and compared our children in New Mexico to other states. And our children seem to be traumatized at a, I don't want to say a higher level, but it's more consistently and more severely. Not dismissing.
Is there?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you: is there a reason? Quickly, is there a reason for that, or was there? Is there a study or anything you learned about why that was?
It's a lot of it is anecdotal. Nobody has studied it specifically, from a social science perspective or a criminal justice perspective of why. Part of it could be poverty. Part of it could be New Mexico is an interesting state in that we have 19 registered Pueblo or the Native American population, as well as 2 reservations. And so we see an extremely high rate of substance abuse and poverty coming from those communities. And part of that bleeds over into the non-Native American populations as well. We have high crime rate, a lot of, because we're a border state, and we have a lot of drugs coming into the state. Again, there haven't been studies that have said why. It's just we see it. We see it in mental health, especially when in juvenile justice we saw it. It was pretty severe. While I was, and I can talk more about this later, while I was working in juvenile justice facilities, that's when I started my doctorate in behavioral health. And so I had the opportunity to use a lot of what I was learning because there was that crossover between mental and medical health. So I was able to sort of look at some of what I was seeing with that more holistic approach. For instance, we had one kid, we had an issue with a young man, we didn't know it was him at the time, that we were seeing soiled underwear in the wash. And I know this sounds kind of odd. And it could be some kid just being, a kid that just didn't have a very good sense of humor. But because of the education I was receiving as a doctor of behavioral health, I stepped back and was able to look at it differently, and it ended up coordinating with the medical provider for the facility, and we were able to diagnose him with encopresis, and they were able to treat that. Whereas if we'd have just approached it as a mental health issue, it would have been pretty ineffective.
That's interesting.
So it was again, like working at the community clinic, working in juvenile justice. I had the opportunity to see a lot of things I wouldn't have been able to work with otherwise. Honestly, I was never interested in working with juveniles, but a lot of times after meeting the parents of some of these kids, the kids' behaviors made a lot more sense. Why they were acting out, seeing the ways that they were abused in the homes. It wasn't uncommon for a juvenile or one of the boys on my unit to talk about having been sent out by his parents to sell drugs, because if he got arrested, he only went to juvenile jail. If they got arrested, they would go to adult jail.
Wow.
So that was honestly not uncommon. And then you would hear stories. My wife, she was a therapist on one of the girls' units, and the stories of what those poor young women had to endure in their homes, it was pretty horrific. So it was a difficult place. I learned a lot there. It gave me a whole different outlook on what our kids, what they experience in the state.
So where are you now? I'm sorry, where are you now?
I retired in 2002. I left CYFD, and I went to the Department of Health as an epidemiologist during COVID. I went there about a week and a half before they sent us all home for COVID, and I spent about a year doing case investigations for COVID, and ultimately in 2022 I retired. Retirement's fun for a little while, and I determined that I wasn't through working. I wasn't through wanting to be involved, and so I had the opportunity to come to work for the Public Safety Psychology Group here in Albuquerque. The agency was originally started to support the law enforcement community, and then over the years they started seeing fire service and corrections clients as well. So I work here part-time now. We do a lot of like crisis intervention and peer support training, as well as therapy, psych testing, and that sort of thing.
And that's where I interviewed you for the film? Was in that office, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So it made me think back to, I think, many moons ago, I think when you were going through the DVH program, I think you and I did a podcast for Cummings Graduate Institute. So it made me, I kind of just had a flashback, I believe. Didn't we do a podcast back in the day?
Yeah.
For CGI. Yeah, that's correct. So that was funny when you were talking about that. I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot all about that. So now with your, not only are you doing that part-time, you're also working with retired fire chief Paul Bierce and Laura Nguyen about doing the fire that burns within still. And can you give us like a quick elevator pitch of what that is? Because I know Chief Bierce dives into it in another episode. People are welcome to go watch that episode if they want to learn more about it. But kind of give us a quick elevator pitch of what that training program is.
Sure. Yeah, I won't give you the whole history of the evolution of that training program, but we developed, excuse me, a lot of New Mexico has a lot of rural fire departments, a lot of very underserved, underfunded fire departments, and so we developed this program where we sort of from front to back we approach. First off, the trauma that fire service and EMS people experience, but we don't just sit there. And too many suicide prevention training, too many of them just stay in the trauma. What we very deliberately did was design the course. It's about an 8-hour class to where we talk about it, but then we start talking about how to mitigate that. We talk about self-care. We talk about kind of the mental health aspects. Because without awareness, it's hard to know how to recognize what they're experiencing. They know it, but it's hard for them to sort it out because they're used to supporting other people, not themselves. So we want to give them, by the time we finish the fire that burns within training, we want to give them hope that yes, there is at the end of your career, you've earned the right to be healthy and happy. We were fortunate enough to get a grant to be able to conduct the training. So I mean, we would have done it anyway, but it just makes it that much easier for us to go to some of these rural departments. And we tell them flat out, it's it's free. We come to you and we pay for lunch, and a lot of
Yeah.
times that's a good foot in the door.
Yeah, you guys were gracious enough to feed me as well when I was filming, so I appreciate that too. So one of my colleague Laura Owen, who's the director and editor of the film, we have like a running joke with you because during this training you talk about your career in the Air Force, and it's such a fascinating story. We're like, Jackson can have his own documentary because it's such a fascinating story. So talk to me about that. Talk to me about your career in the Air Force as a firefighter, and also I forget the other, you were a law enforcement agent, but what were you, a special agent? Am I getting that correct? Is that what you
Yes,
were?
I was a special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations.
So just talk to me about your service time in the Air Force, please.
Okay. Yeah, I always like to, because a lot of times in the fire that burns within, I'm talking to young firefighters. And so I talk about having been in the Air Force. I went in the Air Force in 1976. I joke that was when airplanes were still made of balsa wood and canvas. But my first enlistment in the Air Force, I was a firefighter. And then I had the opportunity when I was overseas. I was stationed in Spain in the late 70s. And I had, excuse me, I had the opportunity to train as an EMT as well, which wasn't common in the Air Force. Most fire departments now, all the firefighters are not only trained in fire service, but they're also at least EMT or paramedic level training as well. So I had the opportunity to go through EMT training, and then my second enlistment, I retrained, and I was a special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And that's where I did, federal law enforcement work. But I look back on my days as a firefighter, and there's that connection of directly being involved with helping people that I had when I was a firefighter. That connection now as a therapist. There's a lot of that same kind of passion and urge to help that goes into both.
Yeah, and how important is that? Have you found that that's a way to connect with those that are at the training or as a clinician? Are you having that background, that shared background experience? Is that helpful in connecting with those law enforcement or firefighters or first responders?
Yes, absolutely. Several years ago, I went to a suicide prevention meeting, the DOH Suicide Prevention Coalition. I went to a meeting with Paul Beers, and we were going around the table, and most of the people there were either fire chiefs or had something to do with fire service, and they knew I was a therapist, and so we went around the table, and it was kind of funny. And I said, I'm so forth. So I'm, Dr. Williams, mental health clinician, and I could see eyes rolling back in their heads. And then I said, and I'm a former firefighter in the Air Force.
Yeah.
And they all went, oh, okay. So I felt that sense of acceptance. So yeah, it definitely does help when we're doing the fire that burns within training or training here at PSPG. I always lead with that because it's important. It's important that they understand that I understand what their needs are and what their experiences have been. That's part of what's so difficult in treating, as a mental health clinician, treating people in the fire service, law enforcement, and corrections. So many therapists out there, they learn kind of the standard ways to approach therapy, and that doesn't necessarily work with this community because a lot of times what they need to share are some pretty raw experiences, things that most people, the average person may experience, hopefully just a couple of major traumas in their life. whereas people in the fire service, that's a day in, day out. Even if it's secondary, treating somebody who's in a car wreck, treating somebody who's a victim of a home fire, and dealing with that, and plus the violence that occurs in our state, and it occurs in other states, but seeing and experiencing, what Paul and I talk about at times is that moral injury of seeing some of the bad things that happen to people that are caused by other people, and so that having that experience has really, I feel, helped me relate and help the people that I treat or the people that we train understand that at least I have some understanding of what they experience.
Yeah, that's fascinating too. And one of the things that my wife, Dr. Carrie English, talks about too is and I think you guys might talk about it too in the training. I don't recall, but talking about that cumulative trauma, that one after the other. And that's really kind of, I think, where things can go sideways is, I apologize, my dog is guarding the front door. But that's one of the things too that can lead to where they need to go talk to somebody. Finally, that one call, that's why it's the call that hits, that may change them, that may affect them in a way that they weren't ready for. So so yeah, that's interesting. And you could definitely tell, I think, because I don't remember at the training if you lead off with you being a former firefighter. I don't think you do. I think you kind of dropped that bomb a little bit later in the training. So I think the people that are there for the training are kind of like, oh, who's this guy? He's a clinician. And then you're like, oh, when I was in the Air Force and the firefighter, and they're like, oh, okay. So I think it's smart how you do that as well. So thank you for that, Jackson. And one of the things I know you guys talk about in the training is, you end with the yellow rose pledge at the end. So you talk about asking the hard question, checking in on your strongest friend, all these things. Like I'm saying, it's okay to talk about these things. That you're trying to break that wall down as much as you can, or crack it enough so that they can break it down. And one of the things that we try to do in the film is to show at the end more how people do things, like yourself. Like you had traumas as a law enforcement agent, as a firefighter yourself, and we had such a good time in your garage because we were filming you when you were doing your wood turning, and there was like some kind of hurricane gale blasting through Albuquerque, New Mexico that day. So I was literally holding my camera against your garage door because it was going bang, 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 and you were doing the wood turning, and I was having to literally sit there and like hold that door. So it was a pretty interesting shoot that day. But so talk to me about how, because one of the things that we thought was important was to show you guys outside of the training, doing something else, being yourselves outside of the training, showing that you're working on yourself as well, like we all should be doing, whatever that is, if that's wood turning, if that's yoga, if that's a walk in the park, whatever that might be. So talk to me about what wood turning does for you.
Okay. Yeah, it's part of it. We like to practice what we preach and engage in some form of self-care. And wood turning was something I just stumbled on a couple of years ago. My wife and I were watching a British crafting show, and they featured different crafters, glass blowers and that sort of thing. And they had a couple of episodes where they had wood turners. And so in watching it, first off, it looked like a lot of fun. And but what really struck me about wood turning, and then what I found when I ultimately got into it, was that it was a very, very mindful exercise. It's a mindful activity. When you take a 10-pound piece of wood, a circular disc or a log or something, and you put it on the lathe and turn it up to, between 800 or 1200 RPM, and then walk up to it with a sharp instrument. You have to be completely focused on what you're doing. And that's one of the things that we talk about in the training, both the fire that burns within and the other trainings, and I also talk about mindfulness with clients, is finding something that allows you to just focus on what you're doing, being very, very present, being very just tuned in to nothing but what's right in front of you. Part of the reason that's important is so often with traumas and depression, other forms of mental health, is you get stuck in those thoughts, and finding a way to disconnect from that is pretty important. And studies have shown, how the brain responds when you allow your brain to get a little bit of a break, even if it's for a half hour at a time. That's why meditation and yoga and those sorts of things are really important. At wood turning, I can be at the lathe for 4 hours and look up and the time has gone so quickly. The other thing that wood turning does for me, it also taps into a couple of other parts of my brain that I really hadn't thought of when I started. Was, first off, I'm crafting something that is creative. I end up with a bowl or a vase or something like that. So I'm using that part of my brain as well. And then I usually just give away whatever I make. Different people have asked me about buying them. I'm like, no, if you want a bowl, I will make you a bowl. But that also is that wanting to just give to other people. So that's important when you locate or when you identify self-care and the different parts of you that are sort of activated by engaging in those activities.
Yeah, and they're beautiful, by the way. So watch the film, especially stay to the end so you can see Jackson's beautiful bowls. It's a good film too, so stay and watch the whole thing. But when you get an opportunity, Jackson, you've got such a fascinating story, and I know you've got a heart out today. So I appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything you wanted to talk about for a few minutes that we have left that we may have missed that you wanted to touch on?
Excuse me. Well, one thing I just wanted to thank you and your partner Laura for taking the interest in what we were doing here in producing a documentary, and I think Paul Beers probably talked to you as well. But the evolution of the training that we're doing really started, I don't know, close to 15 years ago. I was doing my master's to get my master's degree. I was in counseling, and I reached out and I was doing ride-alongs with the Rio Rancho Fire Department, and that's when Paul was the deputy chief of EMS, or battalion chief of EMS, and he and I started talking then that more needed to be done to address the mental health issues of firefighters. I went on and finished school, and then I went on and got my doctorate. Paul, promoted in and was ultimately chief. And somewhere in there, he and I reconnected, and we both still had that desire to make something like that happen. So we talked about it. Actually, we engaged Kara at one point and talked about this training, and so it really just started coming together. We had help from Mary and other folks, and so we got it off the ground, and then you guys came along and said, hey, we want to do a documentary about that, and to us that was so exciting because of how long we had talked about it and how much work and passion we had been putting into it, and then to have you guys come in and say we want to excuse me, I have a tickle on my nose, for you guys to come in and say we want to create a documentary. And then you didn't make it about us. You made it about the bigger issues of how are we addressing mental health in New Mexico. And that's what's more important than what we are doing.
Yeah, thank you, Jackson. This film came together, and one of the interesting parts for me was I produced a podcast with my wife, Dr. English, and I believe it's Chief Pierce's predecessor, and I don't recall his name. That he was the Rio Rancho chief before Paul, I believe. Sorry if I'm incorrect. And they were kind of talking about not necessarily what you guys were doing, but just what does that mean to mental health for first responders and firefighters. And that just kind of stuck in my head. I just really enjoyed that conversation. And so then when Laura and I were exploring an idea for the film, I kind of pitched it to her, and she's like, well, I don't know, that seems like a heavy project to take on right away. Like our first film is to address firefighter suicide, mental health, but it hopefully, it all worked together, it all came together. But so it was interesting. So it just that was interesting. And then we met with you and Chief Pierce, and that meeting went so well, and I feel like everybody connected, and it helps that you and I had we'd worked together a little bit, and then you guys both knew my wife, so there was I think a little bit of a way we could build a fast bond, as I'll say. But Jackson, thank you so much for we didn't get to we'll get it on the next podcast, but there's another fascinating story with you and the radios when you were working in the juvenile system that we just don't have time to get to today. I'm so sorry, but it's a really fascinating story. Dr. English reminded me about it the other day when she was talking about you. So thanks for joining me, Jack. And, thanks. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you. So thanks for joining. And, thank you, audience, for joining us as well. And we'll see you next time on Help Us on the Way.
Thank you. I appreciate it.